I can still hear the scream, a raw, gut-wrenching sound that tore through the stifling silence of the thorn estate like a jagged knife. It wasn't just any scream, it was the cry of a child in absolute despair, a sound that instantly pulled at every old familiar heartstring within me. I was just Lillian Thatcher, a temporary cleaner invisible meant to dust and polish and fade into the background of that cold, opulent mansion. But when that scream echoed from the upper floors, my grandmother's words rang in my ears. When a child cries like that, your duty is to listen, not to ignore. I ran, and what I found changed everything. A boy no older than 7, rocking violently, hitting his head against a bookshelf, lost in a world of pure panic. And then, his father, the stoic, powerful billionaire Ethan Thorne, stormed in his eyes, blazing, demanding to know what the hell I was doing there. In that moment, I knew I'd crossed an unforgivable line, but then, something shifted, and he saw me, he saw us. Have you ever had a moment like that where your life pivots on a single impossible choice, where you defy every expectation, every rule, because your heart simply wouldn't let you turn away? Tell me, what was that moment for you? I'm Lillian Thatcher, and this is the true story of how a hidden connection brought light back into the darkest corners of a billionaire's world. I remember the day vividly, the crisp autumn air in Greenwich, Connecticut, biting at the edges of my worn uniform, a stark contrast to the stifling, almost suffocating silence inside the Thorne estate. My name is Lillian Thatcher, and at that point I was just a temporary cleaner, fresh off a recommendation from my aunt, who'd worked for a neighboring family for years. I'd seen many grand houses in my time mansions, overflowing with antique charm or sleek modern lines, but none, not a single one, felt as cold, as utterly devoid of warmth as this sprawling testament to wealth. It was beautiful, sure, in a stark, intimidating way, all polished marble and gleaming chrome, but it felt more like a mausoleum than a home. My routine was simple, almost meditative. Dust polish, remain invisible. I moved through rooms like a ghost, my presence meant to be unfelt, unacknowledged. Most days, the only sounds were the soft hum of the ventilation system, the distant chime of a grandfather clock, and the subtle whisper of my microfiber cloth against antique wood. But on that particular afternoon, it must have been late, the sun already dipping low enough to cast long, weary shadows through the tall windows. A sound pierced through the mansion's carefully constructed quiet. It wasn't a gentle sound, no. It was a guttural, frantic scream, raw and desperate, echoing from somewhere on the upper floors. It sliced through the stillness like a jagged knife, sharp enough, I swear, to stop the clocks on the very walls. My breath hitched. It wasn't just any cry. It was a sound that resonated deep within me, pulling at old familiar heartstrings I'd thought were long buried. I froze my hand mid-swipe on a grand mahogany table, my microfiber cloth still damp from the polish. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to follow the rules, stay in my assigned zone, don't interfere, don't be seen. But that sound, it wasn't just noise, it was a plea. I hesitated for only a second, a heartbeat that felt like an eternity before my feet moved on their own accord. My grandmother, bless her wise, strong soul, always said, "Lillian, when a child cries like that, your duty is to listen, not to ignore, no matter who they are or who you are." And so propelled by that ingrained wisdom and a primal instinct, I couldn't deny I found myself ascending the grand silent staircase, drawn inexorably towards the source of the distress. Each step on the cold marble was deliberate, a quiet rebellion against the unspoken rules of the house. The sound grew louder, more frantic, as I climbed a shrill, cyclical sobbing that clawed from the inside out. It wasn't a hungry cry, I knew that much. It wasn't sleepy or cranky. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated panic, the kind that rips a soul apart. As I reached the 5th-floor landing, the cries pulsed from behind a partially ajar door. Through the narrow gap, a flickering, multicolored light pulsed rhythmically. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I pushed the door open just enough to see inside, and the scene solidified my resolve, erasing any lingering doubt. Leo Thorne, a boy no older than 7, sat curled on the plush carpet. He was rocking violently, almost convulsively, his small forehead rhythmically hitting the heavy bookshelf beside him with a soft thump, thump, thump. His movements were raw, uncontrolled, a chilling manifestation of pure, exquisite pain, and the silence, the lack of other sounds, was deafening. No one was there, no comforting hand, no soothing voice, no supervision, just the boy and his desperate, agonizing pain. My first instinct, forged by years of caring for my own younger brother Daniel, who also navigated the world differently, was to go to him. Daniel, my sweet, non-verbal Daniel, used to do the same thing sometimes, that frantic rocking, that desperate sound, his arms tight across his chest, tears streaming down his face, a language no one else understood. I knew that sound. I knew that rhythm. I understood it in my bones. It wasn't just a sign of distress. It was a desperate plea, a call for connection from deep within a world that felt overwhelming. As I softly stepped into the room, crouching a few feet away, making sure my movements were slow, non-threatening, my quiet approach was shattered. A thunderous voice, sharp enough to stop clocks and hearts alike, sliced through the fragile moment. It was Ethan Thorne, Leo's father, the stoic billionaire standing rigidly in the doorway. His custom suit, usually radiating an aura of impenetrable control, now seemed to vibrate with barely contained fury. His eyes, usually sharp, calculating, and cold as glacial ice, were ablaze with a mix of shock, anger, and something akin to disbelief as they fixed on me the unexpected help in his son's private sanctuary. In that heart-stopping moment, I knew I had crossed an invisible line, a chasm between staff and family that was rarely, if ever, breached. I could almost hear the unspoken accusation, "How dare you? Who gave you permission?" The reprimand I knew was inevitable. I braced myself, my muscles tensing, but deep down, a quiet, stubborn defiance simmered. Because seeing Leo's desperate plight, witnessing his raw, untended pain, I didn't regret it, not for a second. I just wanted to help him. And looking back now as I recount this story, I know that moment was the crack in the carefully constructed facade of the Thorne estate, the tiny opening through which everything for all of us was about to change. Looking back, the silence that followed Ethan Thorne's furious question, "What the hell are you doing here?" felt like an eternity. The words, sharp accusatory, hung in the air, thick with unspoken judgment. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird, but my gaze remained fixed on Leo. The boy's wild rocking had momentarily faltered at the sound of his father's booming voice, his small body tensing, waiting. It was clear he was bracing himself not for comfort, but for more stress. I instinctively stood, my hands still slightly damp from the polish, and managed a simple explanation, my voice a quiet counterpoint to his fury. I heard his son crying. That was it. No excuses, no lengthy justifications, just the plain truth. Ethan's reaction was swift, decisive, and chilling. "Get away from him," he commanded, his voice cutting like ice, sharper than any blade. It wasn't a request. It was an order, cold and absolute. He moved, then stepping towards Leo, attempting to comfort him. And that's when the true horror of his helplessness, his disconnect, became tragically clear. The moment Ethan's shadow fell over Leo, the boy erupted. He screamed louder than before, a raw, primal shriek, kicking and flailing in a terrifying panic. His small hands flew up, pushing against the air, as if trying to ward off an invisible attacker. It was a stark, agonizing contrast to the slight calming I'd witnessed just moments before, when my quiet presence had seemed to settle him. Ethan, the formidable billionaire, usually so composed, so utterly in control of every facet of his world, looked genuinely bewildered, even helpless. His eyes darted around the opulent nursery, then back to his thrashing son, a silent plea for understanding in their depths. That's when I knew, truly knew with a certainty that vibrated deep in my soul, that I had to try again. I couldn't walk away, not from this. I stepped forward slowly, gently, my movements deliberate. "May I?" I offered, my voice barely a whisper, extending my hand palm up in an open, non-threatening gesture. To my utter surprise, he didn't stop me. He simply stood there, frozen, watching. I knelt, allowing myself to be at Leo's eye level, my movements slow, inviting. The moment Leo's frantic gaze met mine, something shifted. He looked at my outstretched hand, then back at my face, his small body trembling. Then, with a sudden, almost desperate movement, he twisted, turning towards me, and collapsed into my arms. It was as if he'd been waiting for me all along, waiting for a safe harbor in a storm he couldn't navigate. He buried his face in my shoulder, his small hands clutching the back of my uniform. The transformation was instant, absolute. The screaming stopped, replaced by shallow, ragged breaths. I held him swaying gently, remembering how I used to soothe Daniel with the same quiet empathy, humming a low tune, pressing my cheek to his soft hair. Instinctively, I signed "safe" across my chest with my free hand, a gesture my grandmother taught me, a silent promise of understanding, of refuge. Ethan stood there staring. His wide eyes were fixed on Leo, then on me, a mixture of profound shock and raw astonishment etched across his face. "How?" he asked, his voice rough, barely audible. "What did you do?" I looked up at him, my arm still securely around Leo. "I didn't do anything, sir," I calmly explained, my voice soft but firm. "My brother Daniel is nonverbal autistic. This approach, it often helped him." The words hung in the air, a bridge between two vastly different worlds. His posture shifted, then a subtle crack in his previously impenetrable armor. The CEO, the man of sharp edges and controlled fury, seemed to recede, revealing something else beneath a father raw and exposed, desperate for answers, desperate for connection. He finally asked my name, my role in the household. "Lillian Thatcher," I replied, "temporary cleaner." A strange quiet settled in the room, different from the earlier sterile silence. This new quiet felt expectant, hopeful. Then came the unexpected words, softly spoken, almost hesitantly. "Can you stay a little longer today?" He didn't order, he asked. I nodded, still holding Leo, whose breathing was now calm, and even his small body heavy and trusting in my arms. "Yes, sir." As he walked out, the silence in the mansion felt profoundly different for the first time, not empty, not cold, but filled with a nascent hope, a fragile possibility. I stayed with Leo, holding him, as he drifted into a peaceful sleep, the echoes of his earlier distress slowly fading. I tidied the nursery, moving quietly, my mind racing. I half expected Mrs. Albright, or perhaps Mr. Jenkins, the butler, to appear at any moment with a severance check and efficient, polite dismissal. After all, I was just the cleaner who had overstepped. But they didn't. Later that evening, after Leo had finally drifted to sleep in my arms, and I had gently laid him in his bed, I found myself summoned. Not to the housekeeper's office, not to the back exit, but to Ethan Thorne's opulent study. The room was grand-lined with dark leather-bound books and dominated by a massive mahogany desk. He sat behind it, a legal pad in hand, the air thick with an almost tangible tension. He didn't offer me a seat, but his gaze, though intense, lacked the anger from earlier. It was inquisitive, searching. He spoke, his voice low, measured, of Leo's struggles, of years of failed therapists, of specialists from every corner of the globe who had promised solutions but delivered only frustration. He described Leo's outbursts, his profound isolation, the overwhelming grief that had consumed them both since Emma Leo's mother had passed. 2 years, Miss Thatcher, he said, his voice flat with exhaustion. 2 years of trying everything, of spending, whatever it took, and nothing. He paused, looking at me, a cleaner, a woman, with nothing but a damp cloth and an unexpected empathy. He stated, his voice tinged with a bewildered awe. "You just walked in there with a rag in your hand and fixed him." My throat tightened. The word "fixed" chafed. It implied brokenness, and Leo wasn't broken. He was just different. "I didn't fix him, sir." I managed my voice a little rougher than I intended. "I just saw him." That stopped him. His pen, which had been tapping rhythmically against the legal pad, fell silent. He simply stared at me, truly seeing me for the first time, I think. In that quiet room, with the soft, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the distance, he made me an offer. Not a dismissal, but something utterly unforeseen. "I'll double your pay," he said, his eyes unwavering. "Provide a private room in the staff wing. You'll never lift a mop again." My heart raced a frenzied flutter against my ribs. This wasn't just a job. This was a responsibility I felt deep in my bones, a chance to truly make a difference, not just for Leo, but perhaps to ease some of the immense financial burden weighing on my grandmother and on Daniel's care. It was a leap of faith for both of us, a silent, unspoken agreement that something profound and unexpected had begun in the quiet chaos of Leo's nursery. And as I walked away, the weight of the mansion still vast around me, it felt less like an ending and more like the tremulous beginning of everything. The morning after Ethan's unexpected offer felt utterly surreal, leaving behind the cramped, familiar comfort of my old apartment, the lingering scent of lukewarm coffee from the diner where I'd flipped pancakes for years. I arrived at the Thorne estate with little more than a small duffel bag and a cardboard box. It held my most treasured possessions, a few worn paperbacks, a journal, and the framed photo that was my anchor. Mrs. Albright, the head housekeeper, a woman whose stern exterior barely concealed a watchful, almost calculating curiosity, met me at the imposing service entrance. Her eyes, shrewd and assessing, took in my modest belongings. "Mr. Thorne had this redone last night," she said, her voice dry as she led me down a quiet, sun-dappled hallway in the east wing. She handed me a key card for a simple but surprisingly warm room, a far cry from the chilly staff quarters I'd anticipated. "Said you were important. He doesn't give spare rooms to helpers, Miss Thatcher." Her words, delivered without inflection, still carried a weight, a quiet warning, a clear delineation that this was no ordinary arrangement. I wasn't just a new hire. I was different. And being different in a place like this, I knew could be a blessing or a curse. I unpacked quickly, a nervous energy humming beneath my skin. The first thing I did was place that framed photo on the nightstand, my grandmother, her face a roadmap of resilience and love, and a younger Daniel, his wide, innocent eyes gazing up at the camera. That photo was a constant, tangible reminder of why I was here, of the quiet strength and unwavering love my family embodied. It was a piece of my own soul, a connection to the world outside these opulent walls. By 9:30 a.m., precisely as Mrs. Albright had instructed, I found myself outside Leo's nursery door. My heart hammered a chaotic mix of anticipation and trepidation. This was it. This was the true beginning of the unknown. I took a deep breath, pushing away the lingering anxieties about my new role, about the expectations weighing on me. When I entered, the room was bathed in soft morning light, and Leo was already awake, sitting on a colorful rug. He was meticulously sorting colored blocks into neat, almost obsessive piles, his back to me. I greeted him softly, my voice low and soothing, taking care not to startle him. "Good morning, Leo," I murmured. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge me verbally, but his movements, the precise placement of a red block, paused for a beat. A tiny, almost imperceptible hesitation. It was a small victory, a silent acknowledgement, a tiny thread of connection in his quiet world. I didn't push. I just sat cross-legged a few feet away, quiet, non-threatening, just observing. I let him lead, following his silent cues. Minutes stretched into what felt like an hour, filled only with the soft clinking of blocks. Then, without warning, he nudged a red block towards me with his toe. My breath caught. A tiny offering. I smiled, feeling a profound warmth spread through me, a feeling of deep gratitude. Gently, I pushed a blue one back towards him. His game had begun. It wasn't about words, not yet. It was about rhythm, about repetition, about shared space and unspoken understanding. Hours passed in this quiet, unspoken communion. We built towers, sorted colors, and listened to the distant calls of birds from the garden. There was no pressure, no expectation, just presence. As the morning wore on, I began to hum soft, low gospel tones, melodies my grandmother used to sing to Daniel when he was distressed or just when he needed to feel held. Leo didn't protest. In fact, his rocking softened, and he leaned in slightly, ever so subtly, like a small, delicate plant turning towards the sun. He wasn't overtly responsive, not yet, but I could feel the subtle shift in the room's energy, a fragile bridge forming between us. I felt Ethan's presence before I saw him. It was a subtle shift in the air, a faint scent of his expensive cologne, a stillness in the doorway that hadn't been there moments before. He stood there, a silent observer, cloaked in his usual impeccable suit, but his usual stiff posture seemed slightly softened. His eyes, though still guarded, held a new kind of intensity as he watched us. He said nothing, asked no questions aloud, but I could feel the weight of his gaze, the quiet questions forming in his mind, radiating across the room. What was happening here? What was this strange magic unfolding before him? For my part, I simply continued focusing all my attention on Leo, on the quiet rhythm of our interaction. I was learning Leo's unspoken language, observing his cues, the flicker in his eyes, the tiny shift in his posture, the subtle expressions on his face, the nuances that told me everything. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of frustration, moments where I wondered if I was truly making a difference, if this connection was real or just a fleeting comfort. But then, a small gesture from Leo, a faint hum in response from me, and the world seemed to align, if only for a fleeting second, as the sun dipped lower, casting long melancholic shadows across the nursery floor, painting the room in hues of orange and purple. I realized something profound. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a calling, a deep connection I hadn't expected to find in the cold marble halls of a billionaire's estate. And for the first time in a long, long time, after so much quiet struggle and personal loss, I felt a powerful, undeniable sense of purpose beyond simply making ends meet. It was a feeling of belonging, fragile yet real, taking root in the most unexpected soil. The days melted into a routine, a quiet ballet of connection and observation that became the new rhythm of my life within the Thorne estate. Each morning, as the first rays of sun stretched across the polished floors, my work began with Leo. It was a painstaking, gentle process, but his silent world, once so impenetrable, was slowly, beautifully opening to me. He still didn't speak, not with words, but his eyes, once distant and unfocused, began to seek me out, tracking my movements, holding my gaze for fleeting, precious moments. He'd follow me with a silent, unwavering trust, sometimes even initiating contact himself by handing me small objects, a smooth wooden block, a cool, perfectly rounded stone, as if they were tangible messages he didn't yet know how to write, but desperately needed to convey. I introduced new tools, new ways to bridge the gap. Scented clays soft and yielding beneath his fingertips, kinetic sand pouring like liquid gold through his small hands. I brought out a set of laminated cards depicting cartoon emotions, a smiling sun for happy, a tearful cloud for sad. I'd teach him to press the happy card to his chest when he heard the music from my small portable speaker, or the sad one when he saw a picture of the rain-streaked window pane. It was a slow, meticulous process, often requiring endless repetition and boundless patience, but each small breakthrough, each flicker of recognition, each hesitant touch felt like a monumental victory, a silent cheer erupting in my heart. Ethan Thorne, the enigmatic Mr. Thorne, remained an unseen listener for much of this time. He was a shadow at the periphery of our world. He never interrupted our sessions, never intruded on our delicate dance of discovery, but I could often feel his presence. It was a subtle shift in the air, a faint, almost imperceptible scent of his expensive cologne, a stillness in the hallway outside Leo's nursery that spoke volumes. Sometimes, I'd glance up and catch him briefly stepping inside the doorway, a tall, imposing silhouette against the brighter hall. His gaze would be fixed on Leo, an unreadable mix of intense curiosity and profound longing etched across his handsome, often unyielding face. He'd never address me directly in these moments. Instead, I'd hear him later, his voice clipped and precise, asking Mrs. Albright about Leo's day, about my specific methods, the things I was doing. Mrs. Albright, bless her knowing heart, always relayed his inquiries to me with a quiet, significant glance. "He's watching you, Lillian," she'd murmur, and I knew it. He was always watching. One evening, as dusk bled into twilight, casting long, soft shadows across the nursery floor, I was teaching Leo to sort colored beads into separate bowls. The repetitive motion seemed to calm him, grounding him. I began humming a lively gospel tune, one my grandmother used to sing while cooking. It was a melody of joy, of resilience, of deep-rooted faith. Without a sound, without a single spoken word, Leo's mouth stretched into a full smile. His entire face, his eyes, his cheeks lit up with pure, unadulterated joy. It was a breathtaking moment, a silent explosion of happiness. Just then, I felt that familiar presence in the doorway. Ethan. His keys, usually a silent, almost phantom presence in his hand, dropped onto the hallway console with a soft, distinct clatter. It was a sound that should have startled Leo, a harsh interruption in his sensitive world, but it didn't. He watched transfixed as Leo continued to smile, albeit silently, at my silly, playful sock puppet and toy giraffe act. The tiny felt giraffe wobbled on my finger, dancing to my hum, and Leo let out a small, almost imperceptible puff of air, his version of a giggle. Was that him laughing? Ethan asked, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, laced with a fragile hope that caught in my throat. I nodded, a lump forming, explaining quietly, "He's getting closer to making sounds, sir." My gaze was fixed on Leo, who was now reaching out his small fingers, brushing the soft fabric of the giraffe puppet. Ethan moved then, slowly, deliberately. He crouched beside Leo, mirroring my low position. For the very first time, Leo didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. Instead, he reached out a hesitant, feather-light touch against his father's crisp white shirt before returning his attention to the colorful toys. I saw the raw emotion in Ethan's eyes, a flicker of vulnerability so profound, so unexpected that it took my breath away. It was a father seeing his son, truly seeing him for the first time in what felt like forever. "He's trusting you more." I whispered a quiet observation, knowing it was the deeper truth. Ethan nodded, his gaze unwavering from his son. The silence stretched between us waited with unspoken thoughts. Then he spoke of Emma, Leo's late mother. He described her with a tenderness that made his voice crack just slightly, a raw edge of grief still present beneath his carefully constructed composure. He spoke of how she used to play with Leo, using a silly sock puppet voice, how she'd always been the one who could make Leo light up. It was a poignant glimpse into their past, a painful, cherished memory he hadn't shared with anyone before. Later that night, in my modest staff room with the low hum of the mansion around me, I found myself reflecting on Ethan's guarded nature. He was a man of immense control, a titan of industry who could command boardrooms, but he was so utterly lost when it came to his own son, so profoundly paralyzed by grief. I wondered what kind of man tried to control the world, to dictate every outcome but seemed to forget, or perhaps had simply lost the ability to hold his own child, to simply be with him. It was a thought that lingered, a quiet, aching question, echoing in the vast, silent halls of the Thorne estate. A question that I sensed he was only just beginning to ask himself. As weeks turned into a month, the Thorne estate gradually, almost imperceptibly, began to shed its shroud of cold, sterile silence. It was a subtle transformation, like a house slowly exhaling. The soft, rhythmic hum of Mrs. Albright's jazz music would drift from the kitchen now, a warm, melodic presence that filled the usually empty spaces. Windows once always sealed tight against the outside world were now often open, letting in the crisp autumn air, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke, and most significantly, most wonderfully, the occasional bursts of silent, unrestrained laughter from Leo's nursery echoed through the halls, transforming the very atmosphere of the mansion. My connection with Leo deepened daily, becoming an intricate, unspoken language of trust. He would now actively lean into my touch, seeking it out. Sometimes he'd even initiate contact, a gentle brush of his small fingers against my palm, a hesitant lean against my side as we sat together on the rug. These small gestures, seemingly insignificant to an outsider, were monumental to me. Each touch was a thread weaving us closer, pulling him further out of the silent world he'd inhabited for so long. He wasn't just tolerating me, he was inviting me in. One afternoon, a significant shift occurred, a moment that felt like a fragile barrier finally crumbling. Leo had fallen asleep in the sunroom, curled up on a plush armchair, with his favorite stuffed bear looking so peaceful, so utterly innocent. I was about to slip away, when Ethan, still just Mr. Thorne to me, then, though less formal with each passing day, appeared. He invited me to walk with him in the private garden. It was the first time I'd seen him without his customary rigidly tailored suit jacket. His collar was loosened, his sleeves slightly rolled, a subtle, almost imperceptible vulnerability in his posture that I hadn't witnessed before. We walked slowly side by side, the silence between us, no longer tense, but comfortable, companionable. The gentle crunch of fallen leaves beneath our feet was the only sound for a while. He began to speak, his voice lower than usual, almost a murmur against the soft breeze. He spoke about Leo's therapist's recent report, which had noted significant behavioral improvements, and most importantly, that Leo was beginning to trust again. He admitted, his gaze fixed on a distant rosebush, that he'd told the therapist it was you, referring to me, who had made the difference. I chuckled, a soft, self-conscious sound, brushing a stray braid behind my ear. "I'm just one part of it," I said, trying to deflect the praise, feeling a blush creep up my neck. He stopped, then turning to face me fully, his gaze intense, piercing, making my breath catch. "No, Lillian," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "You're the part that matters." For a brief moment the world narrowed, the sounds of birds fading, the gentle breeze seeming to slow. It was an unexpected, raw statement, stripped of all pretense, and it left me speechless. He then spoke of Emma, his late wife, with a raw, aching honesty that startled me, a vulnerability that made his formidable facade crack wide open. He recounted her playful spirit, her vibrant energy, her uncanny ability to make him, a rigid and serious man, genuinely laugh. He spoke of her deep intuition, how she always seemed to see what was in front of him, while he was always 2 steps behind, caught in his own logical calculations. And then his voice choked. Catching painfully in his throat, he confessed his profound panic when she fell ill, how he desperately tried to control everything, believing that order could somehow save her, that sheer force of will or careful planning could replace her vital, irreplaceable presence. It was a testament to his grief, to his helplessness. My own experience with Daniel's passing resonated deeply within me, a familiar ache blooming in my chest. I understood that desperate grasping for control. I shared a piece of my grandmother's quiet wisdom, a truth honed by years of hardship. "Grief makes us grasp for anything that doesn't move, Mr. Thorne," I said softly, my voice filled with empathy, "because what moves might disappear." He looked at me sharply, surprised by my words, by the depth of understanding they conveyed. Then he nodded slowly, a newfound understanding dawning in his eyes, a recognition of shared pain. "You speak like someone who's lost something," he murmured, a quiet observation. "Someone who's lost someone." I corrected gently, my gaze meeting his. We all carry echoes. Later that evening, after Leo was asleep and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, Ethan summoned me to his study. The air was still heavy with unspoken emotions. He sat at his large desk, and then, with a hesitant gesture, he handed me a USB drive. "I found this in Emma's things," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "It's old therapy videos she filmed of Leo. She always said, 'One day we'll forget the hard parts and miss the details. Let's save the details.'" I took the drive, my fingers brushing his for a fleeting second, sending a small jolt through me. He gestured towards the large monitor on his desk. As the first video played, I saw a younger Leo, perhaps 4 years old, his movements less controlled, but still radiating that pure, unblemished spirit. And then I heard Emma's voice, gentle, warm, infused with boundless love, guiding him. In one clip, Leo clumsily but deliberately signed "love" to Ethan, his little hands forming the shape over his chest. Emma's joyful, unrestrained laughter followed, filling the quiet study with a ghost of happiness. I glanced at Ethan. He was standing silently in the doorway, his face pale-drawn, his eyes fixed on the screen, a silent torment playing out behind them. I forgot about that video," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion, raw grief pouring out of him. "I haven't watched these since before the funeral." He confessed how Emma was everything, his anchor, his joy, and that he felt he had erased her by trying to move on, by focusing solely on Leo's care, by burying his own pain. I walked towards him, stepping into his space, my heart aching for the depth of his unspoken sorrow. I placed a hand gently on his arm, a silent offering of comfort. "No, you didn't erase her," I assured him, my voice soft but firm. "You were surviving, Mr. Thorne. You were breaking open in silence, just trying to keep going." He looked at me, a complicated, unreadable expression on his face, a raw mixture of surprise and gratitude. "And you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Are you healing too?" I paused, acknowledging my own journey, the constant ebb and flow of grief that still lived within me. "I think so," I confessed, my gaze meeting his. "Some days more than others. It's a journey, not a destination." In that quiet moment, with the ghost of Emma's laughter playing faintly from the screen, Ethan gently reached out and touched my hand, his fingers warm, comforting. It wasn't a grand gesture, not a romantic one in the traditional sense, but it was profound. It was a gesture of shared vulnerability, of two souls connecting over shared loss and the fragile, arduous path to healing. It was the moment I realized that something unspoken yet undeniable was forming between us. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a visitor in someone else's story. I felt like I might belong to it, like a piece of my own fractured heart was finding its unexpected home. The touch of Ethan's hand that evening, brief as it was, lingered. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not yet, more like a faint, silent tremor beneath the surface of my new reality. It was a bridge, a quiet acknowledgement of shared humanity forged in the crucible of grief and vulnerability. I found myself replaying the moment in my mind, the way his guarded gaze had softened, the raw honesty in his voice when he spoke of Emma. It stirred something deep within me, a sense of empathy that extended far beyond my professional role. The Thorne estate, once a fortress of silence and sorrow, was slowly, subtly coming alive, exhaling the ghosts of its past. One morning, the familiar, comforting scent of cinnamon French toast wafted through the kitchen. It was my grandmother's recipe, a small, tangible piece of home I'd brought into this grand, echoing space. I was barefoot on the cool tile, humming an old Sam Cooke tune, a gospel melody that always grounded me when Ethan entered. He was freshly showered, dressed in a crisp white shirt and comfortable gray slacks, but notably, he was without a tie, a small detail, yet it spoke volumes. He paused at the doorway, a tall, striking figure simply watching me. A faint, almost shy smile touched his lips, softening the sharp angles of his face. "Didn't know breakfast could sound so good," he said softly, his voice low and unexpected in the quiet kitchen. I glanced over my shoulder, a playful retort bubbling up. "You mean smell?" I joked, gesturing to the sizzling pan. He leaned against the doorframe, a relaxed posture I was still getting used to. "No, Lillian," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "I meant what I said." The pause that followed was light, yet meaningful, filled with an unspoken weight that made my cheeks warm. I continued preparing Leo's breakfast, carefully, explaining how he liked the edges of his French toast, a little crispy, a detail I discovered through trial and error. Then, to my surprise, Ethan stepped fully into the kitchen, a space I'd never seen him occupy before. He moved with a quiet purpose, opening cupboards and retrieving plates, forks, and napkins, setting them out on the gleaming island. "You always remember the details," he mused, his voice thoughtful. I looked down, brushing a stray strand of hair behind my ear, a subconscious gesture when I felt vulnerable. "The details are where the heart lives," I replied, a whisper of my grandmother's philosophy. He stopped, considering my words for a long moment, truly absorbing them. Then he resumed setting the table, his movements precise. "I never noticed how empty this place felt," he admitted, his voice barely audible, "until you started filling it." Just then, the baby monitor crackled to life from Leo's nursery, a soft, sleepy whimper, followed by the gentle thud of his small feet hitting the carpet. My apron still tied around my waist was my first instinct. I reached for it, ready to go to him, but Ethan's hand touched my wrist, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture that stopped me. His touch was warm, reassuring. "Let me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. It was a small shift, but I understood. This wasn't just about Leo needing comfort. This was his moment, a father stepping up, taking his place. I watched a lump forming in my throat as he approached Leo's nursery. For the very first time, Ethan led their morning sensory time. He knelt beside Leo on the soft rug, his tall frame awkward at first, but his movements were imbued with deep concentration, mimicking my gestures. I had taught him the sign for cow, forming the horns with my fingers. Ethan tried it, his hands clumsy, yet earnest. Leo, initially hesitant, stared at Ethan's attempt, then, with surprising care, pointed to the small cow figure on the mat and pressed it gently into the kinetic sand. Ethan laughed, then a genuine, unburdened laugh that echoed through the nursery, unlike anything I'd heard from him before. It was rich, completely free of his usual restraint. "He's getting it," he said, his eyes shining with a profound, almost childlike joy. I smiled, my heart full. "So are you," I replied softly, my gaze meeting his. The morning passed in a gentle rhythm of discovery and shared learning. Ethan stayed not as a distant observer or a worried parent, but as an active participant. He watched, he listened, he touched, and for the first time he truly engaged with Leo on his own terms. It was a revelation witnessing this transformation in a man I had initially perceived as so cold and distant. I saw not the formidable CEO, not the stoic billionaire, but a father uncertain, flawed, but finally ready to connect with his son truly and deeply. This wasn't just about Leo's healing, it was about Ethan's as well, a reciprocal journey of discovery and emotional awakening. The house once filled with unspoken sorrow was beginning to breathe again, exhaling the past and inhaling the promise of a different, brighter future. As the weeks turned into months, the easy rhythm of our days at the Thorne estate settled into a comfortable, almost domestic cadence. It felt, to my quiet surprise, less like a sprawling mansion and more like a home, albeit one still governed by unseen rules. Leo continued to blossom, his silent world expanding in ways that filled my heart with a quiet triumph. He communicated more readily now, not just with gestures and steady eye contact, but with the occasional soft hum of contentment, a purr-like sound that meant he was happy and at peace. My unique bond with him became undeniable, a palpable force in the house. Even the usually reserved household staff, who had initially regarded me with guarded curiosity, now offered knowing glances and quiet smiles. Mrs. Albright, in particular, often left a fresh pot of soothing herbal tea in my room after Leo was asleep, a silent, comforting gesture of approval that spoke volumes. However, the quiet peace we had painstakingly built was not destined to last unchallenged. It seemed peace, especially in a house like this, was often just a pause between storms. One Tuesday morning, a sleek obsidian black car, the kind that screamed expensive without needing a logo, pulled up the winding driveway. Out stepped a woman who exuded an air of sharp critical judgment, an aura of icy elegance that made the very air around her feel thinner. It was Victoria Thorne, Ethan's older sister. She was a formidable presence, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed to be sculpted from pure authority, her silver hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. Her eyes, the same piercing blue as Ethan's, but colder, seemed to miss absolutely nothing. From the moment she entered the grand foyer, I could feel the palpable shift in the atmosphere, a subtle tension, a renewed coldness that permeated the house like a sudden draft. "Victoria," I quickly learned from the hushed whispers of the other staff was the family's unofficial matriarch, fiercely protective of the Thorne name, its reputation, and its immense wealth. She was also fiercely opinionated about Ethan's life choices, especially concerning Leo. She observed me with a thinly veiled skepticism, her gaze raking over me as if cataloging my every imperfection. Her questions were polite, almost saccharine, but probing, often directed at Mrs. Albright rather than me, as if I were merely a curiosity to be discussed, not a professional to be engaged with. "And this is the cleaner who now cares for Leo?" I overheard her ask, once her voice laced with an implied doubt that cut deeper than any direct insult. It was clear she viewed my presence, my unorthodox role, as an unconventional, perhaps even inappropriate deviation from the proper way things should be handled at the Thorne estate, a thorn in her perfectly ordered side. Her doubts, once subtle, quickly escalated into direct challenges. She began to question Ethan directly about my qualifications, her voice dripping with concern, implying that a professional from a reputable high-end agency would be far more suitable for Leo. She skillfully brought up the past, the string of failed therapists and specialists who had come and gone, suggesting that this temporary phase with me would also inevitably end in disappointment for Leo, leaving him and the family more vulnerable. I felt the pressure, a tightening knot in my stomach, the subtle attempts to undermine my position, to erode the fragile trust I had built. Yet through it all, I continued my work with Leo, unwavering in my commitment, my focus remaining solely on his needs. His progress was my silent, most powerful defense. Ethan, to my quiet relief, consistently defended me. He would calmly but firmly counter her arguments, his voice measured but resolute, pointing to Leo's undeniable progress. "Victoria," he said, his gaze steady on his sister's, "Leo is calmer than he's been in years. Lillian understands him in a way no one else has." His defense was a balm to my anxieties, a silent, unequivocal affirmation that my work mattered and that he valued my presence more than he valued his sister's approval. He saw what I brought to Leo to the house. He saw me. Yet I knew this wasn't just about Leo's well-being for Victoria. It was about control, about appearances, about maintaining the rigid standards of the Thorne name. And perhaps it was also about her own unresolved grief over Emma's death, projecting her pain and fear onto Leo's future. She saw my unorthodox role as a threat to the family's carefully constructed image, a raw reminder of their vulnerability, their inability to cope with Emma's absence. The estate, which had slowly begun to feel like my sanctuary, now felt like a battleground with unseen forces arrayed against the fragile peace we had built. I understood then that my journey here was not just about helping Leo. It was also about navigating the complex, often unseen dynamics of a powerful family and earning my place not just as a caregiver, but as a trusted, vital part of their lives. It was a fight, and whether I wanted it or not, I was in it. Victoria Thorne's scrutiny continued, a cold, persistent shadow cast over the fragile peace that had begun to bloom in the estate. Her pointed remarks delivered with an almost surgical precision, and her critical glances made me acutely aware of the invisible line, the chasm of wealth and social standing that still existed between my world and Ethan's. It was a constant reminder that despite the shifts in our daily lives to some, I was still just the help. Yet despite her unwavering presence, I remained steadfast in my work with Leo. His progress, his quiet triumphs, were the most powerful counter-argument to any skepticism, a truth no amount of polite questioning could dismantle. One particularly stormy evening, the sky outside turning a bruised, ominous purple, a sudden jarring clap of thunder ripped through the mansion. It reverberated through the very foundations of the house, sending Leo into a frantic, overwhelmed state. He began rocking violently, his small body a tight ball of distress, his whimpers amplified by the harsh, almost blinding flashes of lightning that illuminated the nursery windows. Ethan, still Mr. Thorne to me, though our interactions were softening, rushed in his face, etched with a raw, desperate worry, but it was clear he felt utterly helpless, frozen in the face of his son's escalating panic. I didn't hesitate. My feet moved on their own accord, guided by instinct. I immediately went to Leo, kneeling beside him, my presence a calming anchor in his storm. I applied deep, even pressure to his back, a technique that often soothed Daniel, and began humming low, continuous tunes, a comforting drone against the thunder's roar. Slowly, painstakingly, Leo's rocking began to subside, his small body easing back from the brink of pure terror, allowing me to gently bring him back to a state of equilibrium. As Leo finally nestled into my arms, still trembling, his face buried against my shoulder, Ethan watched. His own body language reflected a deep, almost primal fear, a mirroring of Leo's distress. He used to get like this sometimes with Emma. He confessed, his voice barely a whisper, thick with the raw grief that still clung to him like a shroud. She knew exactly what to do. I never did. In that moment, the formidable facade of the billionaire, the controlled, powerful CEO, crumbled, entirely revealing a man utterly vulnerable, still grappling with the profound, shattering loss of his wife and his heartbreaking inability to comfort his son in the same way. It was a shared moment of raw human pain, a connection forged in sorrow. I held Leo gently, my gaze meeting Ethan's. "It's not about knowing what to do, Mr. Thorne," I told him, my voice soft but firm. "It's about being there, truly present." Emma showed him that. You can too. My words hung in the air, a quiet invitation to step into the messiness of emotion, to simply be with his son's pain rather than try to fix it. Later that night, the storm still raging outside, the rain lashing against the windows, I found myself in the garden, seeking solace under the ancient magnolia tree. Its broad leaves, slick with rain, offered a comforting canopy. I held a steaming mug of my grandmother's cinnamon hibiscus tea, its warmth a small comfort against the chill. The quiet rustle of the leaves, the rhythmic patter of rain, always calmed me, a balm to my own often turbulent thoughts. Unexpectedly, Ethan joined me. He emerged from the house, a dark silhouette against the glow of the distant windows, holding 2 steaming mugs. "I thought you might like chamomile," he said, his voice softer than usual, a subtle hum of exhaustion beneath it. "Figured it's either that or more bourbon, and you don't strike me as a bourbon before bed person." He even managed a faint wry smile. I chuckled, a genuine unforced laugh escaping me, easing the tension that still lingered from the day's events. "You figured right," I replied. We sat on the cold stone bench, comfortable silence settling between us for a long moment, the relentless rain providing a gentle, natural backdrop to our quiet contemplation. He then turned to me, his voice quieter, more careful, a hesitant vulnerability in his tone. "Lillian," he began, his gaze direct, "you mentioned Daniel once. Your brother." He paused, choosing his words. "What happened?" I exhaled slowly, the steam from my mug clouding briefly in the cool night air. Sharing Daniel's story was always difficult, opening a wound that never truly healed. I recounted the painful details, Daniel's unexpected seizure, the terrifying complications that followed his passing in the hospital, while I was frantically trying to fill out insurance paperwork, trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare while his life slipped away. He was the only person in the world who saw me without expecting anything back. I confessed, the old wound aching raw and exposed in the storm-swept darkness. Ethan listened intently, his gaze unwavering, absorbing every word. "That sounds like Leo," he said softly, a profound, aching understanding in his eyes, a shared recognition of that unique, unconditional love. He then spoke more freely, more openly than ever before about Emma. He described her as jazz, to his rigid nature a vibrant force that had brought joy and spontaneity into his meticulously ordered life. He recounted how she laughed too loud, danced barefoot in the rain, how she embraced life with an uninhibited spirit he had always admired but never quite understood. His voice cracked slightly as he admitted, she was everything. It was the most open, the most human I had ever seen him. He admitted his deep, gnawing fear of failing Leo, his relentless struggles with grief, and his profound surprise at how a cleaner, he even used the word, almost with a touch of bewilderment, had managed to reach his son when so many highly paid professionals had not. "You make this look easy, Lillian," he said, shaking his head slightly, "but I know it's not." I looked at him, truly seeing the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the weight of years of unspoken grief. "You're not difficult, Mr. Thorne," I countered, my voice gentle. "You're just grieving in the only way you know how." His eyes met mine, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. He took a deep breath, and then a momentous shift occurred. "Call me Preston, please," he said, his voice low, almost a plea. It was a small shift in words, a simple request, but it was a seismic shift in our dynamic. In that moonlit garden amidst the echoes of our pasts, the raw edges of our shared grief, a deeper, undeniable connection began to form. It wasn't just about Leo anymore. It was about two individuals scarred by loss finding a fragile, yet powerfully resonant sense of understanding and comfort in each other's presence. My heart stirred, recognizing something undeniable, something profound, something that stretched far beyond the established boundaries of employer and employee. It was the quiet, terrifying, and utterly beautiful stirrings of trust. The night in the garden where Ethan had asked me to call him Preston marked a profound turning point. It was a subtle shift in nomenclature, yet it felt seismic, a deliberate demolition of the formal barriers that had once stood so rigidly between us. That evening, a nascent respect, something akin to a fragile burgeoning friendship, began to replace the polite distance. My days with Leo continued to be a journey of small daily miracles, each breakthrough a testament to patience and presence. But now Preston was no longer just a distant observer. He was an active, eager participant. His desire to learn to truly understand Leo's silent world was palpable. "I want to know what you know about him," he confessed one morning, his voice earnest, almost vulnerable. "About how to reach him." I simply told him he already possessed the most crucial element, willingness. "Leo," I explained, "will teach you if you're patient enough to listen." Our shared lessons with Leo quickly became a regular, cherished part of our mornings. I taught them both simple sign language, a silent vocabulary to bridge the gaps: more, stop, help, love. Preston was clumsy at first, his movements stiff and precise, much like his business demeanor, a stark contrast to my fluid, intuitive gestures. Yet his earnestness was undeniable, his concentration absolute. Leo, his bright eyes darting between us, watched our hands mimicking. Slowly, tentatively, he began to copy. One afternoon, Preston signed more, exaggerating the gesture slightly, and Leo responded with a half-formed, wobbly version of the same sign. Preston's eyes, usually so guarded, filled with unshed tears. He said nothing, simply nodded, a joyous, unburdened smile spreading across his face, and reached for Leo's small hand, gently squeezing it. It was a raw, beautiful moment, a father and son communicating for the first time in a language beyond words, a silent symphony of connection. I later wrote in my journal reflecting on this profound breakthrough. He's coming back to his son, not as a savior or a fixer, but as a father learning a new language, one built on silence, trust, and steady hands. That same night, a soft knock came at my door. It was Preston holding an old, worn book. "I found this in Emma's things," he said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "It's about parenting children with sensory disorders. I thought you might want to read it together." My heart fluttered in my chest, a small, unexpected bird taking flight. The gesture, the shared interest, the unspoken intimacy of reading together was a quiet invitation. "I'd like that," I replied softly, meeting his gaze. Before walking away, his hand still on the doorknob, he paused. "Thank you for staying," he added, his words simple yet profound, resonating deeply within me. I realized then that I wasn't just staying for the job or for Leo or even for my family's pressing financial needs. I was staying because I was building something here slowly, quietly, something precious and fragile. It was like Leo's burgeoning laughter, like trust blooming between unlikely hands. The shift extended far beyond the nursery. Preston began to seek out my company not just for updates on Leo, but for everyday conversations, discussions about books he was reading, current events, even mundane observations about the meals served in the grand dining room. He'd occasionally join me for my evening tea in the private garden, sharing his chamomile, and for the first time, I saw genuine, unvarnished glimpses of the man Emma had loved. He was intelligent, thoughtful, with a dry, unexpected wit that would occasionally surface, catching me off guard and eliciting a genuine laugh. I knew the vast, undeniable differences in our backgrounds. He, the white, wealthy, impeccably guarded CEO of a sprawling empire. I, the black maid from humble beginnings, carrying the quiet dignity of my family's struggles. The world outside these walls would have scoffed, would have judged. But in those quiet moments, under the soft glow of the moonlight, we were just two people sharing thoughts, finding common ground. Two souls drawn together by an unexpected current. The estate no longer felt like a place where I was merely employed, a transient figure passing through. It felt like a place where I was becoming an integral, irreplaceable part of a family's painstaking, beautiful healing journey. The line between professional and personal was blurring, not in an uncomfortable or inappropriate way, but in a way that felt natural, organic, and deeply significant. It felt like destiny, unfolding one quiet conversation at a time. Just as the fragile new dynamic between Preston and me began to solidify, a delicate tapestry woven from shared moments and quiet understanding, a formidable challenge arose, threatening to unravel everything we had painstakingly built. It began subtly, with increased, almost incessant visits from Victoria Thorne. She wasn't just observing anymore, her sharp eyes taking inventory. She was actively campaigning relentlessly, pushing for what she called a more structured solution for Leo's future. Her campaign centered on enrolling Leo in an exclusive residential school for children with special needs. She'd meticulously printed brochures highlighting its world-class facilities, its cutting-edge therapies, and its expert staff. Her arguments, I had to admit, were logical, impeccably persuasive, and utterly devoid of the personal connection that had become the cornerstone of Leo's remarkable progress. To Victoria, it was a matter of scientific rigor and professional protocol, not messy, unpredictable human bonds. As part of her orchestrated effort, she even arranged a surprise visit from a renowned child development specialist, Dr. Eleanor Vance, a woman whose demeanor was as clinical and detached as her white lab coat was pristine. I was present, of course, a silent, almost invisible observer to Dr. Vance's interactions with Leo, which were professional, precise, and utterly lacking in the warmth and intuition that defined my connection with him. The specialist's report delivered to Preston a week later was a masterpiece of academic language. It acknowledged Leo's remarkable improvements in mood and responsiveness, a concession that must have chafed Victoria. But it also crucially highlighted his continued developmental delays, emphasizing the ongoing challenges. Victoria seized upon this, using the report as powerful leverage, pressing Preston to make what she vehemently called the rational choice for Leo's long-term future. "He needs more than just a kind heart, Preston," she argued, her voice cold and unyielding, echoing through the silent drawing room one afternoon. "He needs rigorous scientific intervention that only a specialized institution can provide. This arrangement with Lillian," she continued, her gaze sweeping dismissively in my direction, "is a temporary comfort, not a solution." Her words hung in the air, a thinly veiled insult, implying my gentle, intuitive approach was merely a fleeting balm, insufficient for a thorn heir. The pressure on Preston was immense. He was a man of logic and reason, accustomed to making decisions based on data, expert opinions, and irrefutable facts. I could see him grappling with Victoria's relentless arguments, his face etched with turmoil lines of exhaustion pulling at the corners of his eyes. He was torn, caught between the undeniable beautiful progress Leo had made with me and the formidable external pressures to conform to societal expectations, family obligations, and seemingly objective professional recommendations. One evening, after what I could only imagine was a particularly heated, draining argument with Victoria, Preston came to me. He found me in Leo's nursery, quietly tidying toys after putting the boy to bed. He looked utterly exhausted, his shoulders slumped, his usually immaculate hair slightly disheveled. "Lillian," he began, his voice low, heavy with resignation. "Dr. Vance's report. Victoria is pushing hard. She says I'm being sentimental, that I'm not thinking about Leo's future clearly. He was asking for my reassurance, my strength, but I knew I couldn't just give him platitudes. He needed a truth that resonated deeper than any professional assessment. I looked him directly in the eye, my voice firm, despite the tremor in my own heart. "Preston," I said, "what does Leo need? Not what does a report say, or what does Victoria think? What does Leo need from you?" It was a question designed to cut through the noise, to bring him back to the purest, most elemental truth. The climax hit during a tense family dinner that Victoria had meticulously orchestrated. She had invited other powerful Thorne family members' cousins, an elderly aunt, all seated around the grand mahogany table like a jury. The conversation, seemingly innocuous at first, subtly shifted, inevitably turning to Leo's situation. Victoria, ever the manipulator, began to present her case for the residential school, her voice smooth with feigned concern. She artfully wove in snippets from Dr. Vance's report, subtly undermining my role, portraying me as a well-meaning but ultimately unqualified caregiver whose emotional approach, while comforting, lacked the necessary rigor for a child of Leo's potential. The implied message was clear chillingly, so I, a black maid from outside their world, was an inadequate solution for a Thorne heir. Preston, usually reserved in such formal settings, listened, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on some distant point. I watched him, my heart pounding, wondering if he would waver, if he would finally give in to the immense pressure. He took a deep breath, his knuckles white as he gripped the table. Then something in him, the last shred of his controlled patience, perhaps snapped. He slammed his hand on the table, a sudden sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot through the elegant dining room, rattling the crystal glasses. "Enough!" he thundered, his voice raw with emotion, devoid of its usual carefully modulated tone. He stood, his imposing figure dominating the room, addressing his family, his gaze sweeping across their stunned faces. "For 2 years," he declared, his voice rising, imbued with a passionate conviction I'd never heard from him, "Leo existed in a cage of his own, making a cage of grief and isolation that no expert, no expensive program, no professional could break through." He paused, his eyes blazing, then continued, "It was Lillian, with her quiet empathy, her boundless patience, her willingness to see him, truly see him, that brought him back." He turned to me, then his eyes blazing with a fierce, almost blinding protectiveness, a silent promise. "She didn't just comfort him," he stated, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "She taught me how to be a father to him again. She taught me to listen to his language, to sit in his silence, to find joy in his quiet world. And if that's not a solution, then I don't know what the hell is." It was a public declaration, a dramatic rejection of their judgment, and an unequivocal, searing affirmation of my place and of the bond we had forged. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife, the only sound, the faint, distant ticking of the grandfather clock. In that momentous, breathtaking pause, I knew that whatever happened next, our lives at the Thorne estate, Leo's, Preston's, and mine, would never be the same. The storm had broken, yes, but in its dramatic fury it had also cleared the air, revealing the true, undeniable strength of the connection we had found. The aftermath of Preston's impassioned declaration at the dinner table left a tangible mark on the estate's atmosphere, a palpable shift, like the air after a violent thunderstorm, fresh and clear, but still humming with residual energy. Victoria, though visibly stunned and momentarily silenced, eventually retreated, her formidable presence now tinged with a reluctant, almost grudging acceptance. The other family members, accustomed to Preston's stoic, unreadable demeanor, seemed genuinely taken aback by his emotional outburst. For the first time, their gazes lingered on me, not with disdain, but with a mixture of curiosity and a grudging respect. The air had been cleared of the suffocating weight of judgment, but the path forward, I knew, was far from certain. I felt a surge of both profound relief and an undeniable trepidation. Preston had chosen to defend me to defend us in a way I hadn't dared to hope. Yet his public acknowledgement of my impact and the raw, unbridled emotion behind it amplified the unspoken truth that had been quietly growing between us, a truth too powerful to ignore. In the days that followed, a quiet understanding settled between Preston and me deeper than any words could express. The rigid boundary between employer and employee had not just blurred, it had all but dissolved, replaced by a more profound, more personal connection. Our conversations now ranged far beyond Leo's latest breakthroughs or daily routines. We spoke of personal reflections on grief and healing, the unexpected turns life takes, and the profound, often challenging nature of loving fiercely. He began openly seeking my advice on matters beyond Leo's immediate care, including decisions about the estate's sprawling staff, and even subtle business dilemmas, valuing my intuitive perspective in a way that truly surprised me. It was clear he trusted my judgment, my insights in a way he trusted few others. One quiet afternoon, as Leo played contentedly in the nursery, immersed in his world of kinetic sand and colorful blocks, Preston found me by the window. I was gazing out at the burgeoning garden, the late autumn light casting a golden glow on the turning leaves. He spoke softly, his voice tinged with a vulnerability I had come to recognize, a quiet admission that always tightened something in my chest. "Lillian," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, I realize now how much I've relied on you, not just for Leo," he paused, his gaze sweeping across the peaceful nursery, "but for bringing light back into this house, into my life." He paused again, choosing his words with unusual care, as if each one held immense weight. Victoria's arguments, the logic of it all, it almost convinced me, the easy conventional path. But seeing Leo smile, truly smile, seeing him reach for you, seeing how you've reached me, that's the only logic I need. His eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were soft, filled with an emotion that mirrored my own burgeoning feelings. He then made an unspoken choice, a silent, profound commitment that went beyond any contract or formal agreement. He told me he had formally declined the exclusive residential school's offer, sending a terse but polite refusal, and he had also dismissed Dr. Vance, thanking her for her assessment, but stating unequivocally that Leo's needs were being met in a way that transcends conventional therapy. He looked at me, then his eyes holding a depth of emotion that reflected the quiet turmoil and ultimate clarity within him. "I want you to know," he said, his voice earnest, unwavering, "that you are indispensable here, to Leo, to me." It wasn't a proposal, not yet, but it was a powerful declaration of profound trust and reliance, a statement of value that brought a lump to my throat. Later that week, a small, subtle, yet incredibly significant change occurred. Ethan, who now consistently went by Preston, a name that felt natural, intimate on my tongue, started leaving little notes for me. They were tucked into Leo's therapy books, or placed discreetly beside my morning tea mug on the kitchen counter, or even slipped under my door. They were never long, small observations about Leo's latest progress, a quiet thank you for a moment shared, or sometimes just a thought. He wanted to share a question that had popped into his mind. It was his way of reaching out, of maintaining the connection, of acknowledging our shared world, even when we weren't physically together. I responded in kind, leaving my own small notes for him, a quiet dialogue unfolding across the grand, once silent estate. It was a secret language just for us. The climax of this chapter wasn't a dramatic confrontation, but the quiet culmination of these subtle, profound shifts. One evening, after putting Leo to bed, his small hand still warm in mine for a moment, Preston found me in the kitchen preparing my nightly herbal tea. He didn't ask about Leo. There was no agenda, no business to discuss. Instead, he simply stood beside me, leaning against the counter, the comfortable silence stretching between us, filled only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft clink of my spoon against the mug. "Lillian," he said, his voice low, intimate, a deep rumble that resonated through me. I I don't want you to ever feel like a temporary presence here again." He paused, then continued, his gaze unwavering, full of a depth that made my breath catch. This is your home now, if you want it to be." He wasn't just offering me a job or even a secure position. He was offering me a place, a sense of belonging, a rootedness I hadn't realized I craved until that very moment. My heart swelled, a quiet, profound acceptance settling over me, warm and expansive. The choice had been made not in grand words or public declarations, but in quiet understanding, in shared vulnerability, and in the comfortable, evolving space we had carved out for ourselves within the vast, echoing halls of the Thorne estate. I had found not just a job, not just a purpose, but a family, and perhaps a future in the most unexpected of places. Looking back, the past year has unfolded like a dream. I never dared to articulate, a quiet miracle woven into the fabric of daily life. The Thorne estate, once a formidable symbol of isolation and grief, has truly transformed. It's no longer just a grand house. It's a home vibrant with the soft murmur of conversation, the occasional bursts of music from Leo's therapy sessions, and the quiet, comforting hum of connection that now permeates every room. My mornings still begin with Leo, filled with sensory play and gentle guidance, but now Preston is often right there with us. He's not just observing, not just learning. He's actively participating, fully immersed in Leo's world. He's learned to sign cow and more with a newfound confidence, his once rigid fingers now moving with a remarkable fluidity. I've witnessed the profound joy that lights up his face when Leo, still nonverbal but remarkably expressive, reaches for his hand, or when he responds to Preston's gentle hum with a soft, contented sigh. The language between father and son has blossomed a beautiful, unique symphony of unspoken understanding that fills the nursery with a quiet magic. Leo, my sweet, resilient Leo, continues to astound us all. While he still navigates the world in his own unique, sensory-driven way, his overwhelming outbursts are now rare, replaced by moments of deep engagement and joyful exploration. He communicates his needs and desires with increasing clarity through gestures, expressions, and even subtle vocalizations that only we understand. Just last week during our sensory time, when I handed him his favorite blue triangle piece, he didn't just take it. His small fingers brushed my palm in a gentle, deliberate thank you. It was a tiny gesture, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes, confirming that our patience, our dedication, our shared belief in him were truly bearing fruit. It was a tangible sign that he felt seen, understood, and appreciated. My own life has changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. The crushing burden of my grandmother's medical bills is no longer a constant suffocating weight, allowing her to rest easier. And I've been able to ensure Daniel, my precious, beloved Daniel, has access to the best resources and support available. Knowing he's thriving gives me a peace I hadn't known in years. I continue to live in my comfortable, quiet room in the staff wing, but the stark lines between staff and family have long since blurred, softening into a warm, inclusive embrace. Mrs. Albright, once so watchful and reserved, now greets me with genuine warmth, her eyes twinkling with amusement, as she often shares anecdotes about Preston's more relaxed demeanor, chuckling that he smiles more these days. Even Victoria, after her initial formidable resistance, has slowly, subtly come around. Her visits are less frequent, and her questions about Leo are gentler, less probing, infused with a hint of genuine concern. I've even caught her observing our interactions with a softened gaze, a hint of something akin to wonder in her eyes. She hasn't apologized for her past skepticism, but her quiet acceptance is a powerful form of peace, offering a testament to Leo's undeniable progress. The relationship between Preston and me, and that's the part of the story I hold closest to my heart, a precious, evolving secret. It evolved naturally, organically, like a slow-blooming flower, from a shared purpose to a shared vulnerability, and then to something deeper, something profoundly tender and undeniably real. Our late-night conversations in the garden became a cherished ritual, a sacred space where we could shed the expectations of our roles and simply be ourselves. Preston the man, grappling with grief and responsibility, and Lillian the woman learning to trust again. We discussed everything and nothing. Leo's hopeful future, the shadows of our pasts, our nascent dreams for ourselves, and the quiet, profound comfort we found in each other's presence. One evening, under the soft silver glow of the moon, its light filtering through the rustling leaves of the magnolia tree, Preston reached for my hand. It wasn't with the formality of an employer or the tentative touch of someone uncertain. It was with the quiet tenderness of a man who had found solace, his fingers intertwining with mine. "Lillian," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, raw with emotion. "You didn't just save my son, you saved me. You brought light back into a house and a heart that had been dark for far, far too long." He didn't need to say more. In his eyes, as they met mine in the soft moonlight, I saw not just gratitude, but a deep, abiding affection, a profound sense of connection that mirrored my own burgeoning feelings. We haven't rushed anything. Our connection is built on a foundation of shared understanding, mutual respect, and a profound, unwavering love for Leo. It's a love that transcends societal expectations, conventional roles, and the vast differences of our backgrounds. Every morning, as the early summer light streams through the nursery windows, casting golden beams onto the polished wooden floor, I find myself sitting across from Leo, gently guiding him through his world of colors and textures. And often Preston is right there beside us, learning, loving, and simply being present. This house, once haunted by loss and shrouded in sorrow, now hums with the promise of new beginnings. For Leo, and for Preston, and for me, it feels like forever. The story of Lillian Leo and Preston Thorne is more than just a narrative of unexpected connections within the walls of a grand estate. It's a profound exploration of what it means to be human, to heal, and to find belonging in the most unforeseen circumstances. At its heart, this story teaches us about the power of empathy. Lillian, with her intuitive understanding born from her own experiences, didn't approach Leo with clinical detachment or a checklist of symptoms. She approached him with an open heart, seeing past his struggles to the child within. This reminds us that true connection often bypasses logic and professionalism, relying instead on our innate human capacity for compassion and presence. In a world increasingly focused on quick fixes and expert solutions, Lillian's journey underscores the vital role of simply being there for someone, truly seeing them and meeting them where they are. The Thorne family's journey, particularly Preston's, illustrates the complexities of grief and healing. Preston, a man of immense control, initially sought to manage his sorrow and his son's pain through external solutions, through order and logic. But grief, as Lillian wisely observed, makes us grasp for anything that doesn't move. His transformation began when he dared to let go, to embrace vulnerability, and to allow himself to be taught by Lillian and by Leo himself. This highlights that healing is rarely a linear path. It often requires dismantling our protective facades and allowing ourselves to be messy, imperfect, and open to unexpected guidance. It shows that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in control, but in surrender to the human experience. Finally, this narrative speaks to the breaking down of societal barriers and the unexpected places where family can be found. Lillian, a temporary cleaner from humble beginnings, found herself indispensable in a billionaire's mansion. Her race, her social status, all the things that society might use to define and limit her, became irrelevant in the face of her profound ability to connect and heal. The story urges us to look beyond superficial differences and to recognize the inherent worth and capacity for impact in every individual, regardless of their background. True belonging isn't about shared blood or social standing. It's about shared purpose, mutual respect, and the quiet act of choosing to be there for one another. If this story resonated with you, if it made you pause and reflect on your own journey, or if it sparked a different perspective, please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Your insights truly enrich our community. And if you cherish stories that delve into real emotions, complex characters, and unexpected bonds, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next explorations into the human heart. Hit that bell icon to stay updated